Many Spanish learners, especially at that upper beginner, intermediate stage, tell me that they can understand far more Spanish than what they can speak. And often they're telling me this almost from a place of frustration. Like, I don't know why my listening comprehension is so much more advanced than my speaking. I really wish I could speak more. But I actually get really excited when I hear people tell me this. And so I want to let you know why this is not a bad thing that your listening comprehension is more advanced, and also give you some really powerful tips so that you can get your speaking up to par. Comencemos, amigos. What's up, language leaders? Welcome back to another video, or if you're new to me, hello, my name is Erica Ray. I'm a Spanish coach, teacher, and storyteller, here to help you love, learn, and live the Spanish language through stories. If that sounds intriguing to you, well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that cute little bell so that you don't miss any videos. So let's first understand why you can understand more Spanish than you can speak. Well, one reason is because of the cognates. So English and Spanish share many similar words. In fact, I haven't confirmed this, but I've read that anywhere between 30 to 40% of all English words share a similar Spanish word. Therefore, even if you feel like you're starting from zero, you actually never are. Now, it's true that some words, even though they're spelled the same or in a very similar way, they're pronounced quite differently in Spanish, so you could still miss the word if you're just listening and not reading, but that's not always the case. Think of words like conclusión, decisión, control. Even if you were not looking at the word, if you heard that spoken, you could probably take a guess at what they mean, and you'd probably be right because of how close they are to English. Now, of course, we have our false cognates as well. So those are the ones that do not mean what you would expect them to mean. And they can be quite tricky, but there are plenty true ones as well. Now, that doesn't mean that you could produce it if you had to, because you may not know the word. You could be hearing it for the first time, but you're still going to recognize it even if you cannot produce it, and that is one reason why you can understand more Spanish than what you can speak. Another point to mention is context. So in certain situations, you simply expect certain words. Let's say you're in a Mexican restaurant, for example. You're expecting to hear certain words, such as bebida, comida, menú, or carta, as we commonly call it here in Mexico, sentarse, traer, pedir, right? These are all words that even if you cannot pronounce them perfectly, or even if you couldn't even remember how to say them in the moment that you need them, you do recognize them because you are expecting them. The scene is set for you, so to speak. And so this context applies to whether you're in a physical context, like the restaurant we were just talking about, or a virtual context, such as when you are listening to someone speak about something. As long as you know the general theme of what they're talking about and they haven't just kind of come at you out of the blue and you have no clue what they're even saying, if you have the scene set for you, then you're probably going to be able to pick up quite a bit more than what you could actually produce yourself because you are expecting certain words. In fact, spoiler alert, context is the first of the 4-step process that I walk you through in my free guide about how to learn Spanish through stories. And this applies to fiction stories or someone telling you a story or any kind of story that you can imagine. Language is really based on stories. So go ahead and check out that free guide at ericaraylanguage.com/stories. Another reason why you can understand more than you can speak is because sentence structure, aka grammar, is more easily understood than produced. So going back to that restaurant example, maybe sentarse is something that you can kind of expect that you're going to hear, but that could come in a lot of different forms. The waiter, the host could say, ¿Dónde les gustaría sentarse? Okay, there we have the entire infinitive, but it could also be siéntense, por favor, with a hand gesture, right? Or it could be, ¿quieren sentarse cerca de una ventana? Right? Would you like to sit next to a window. So this sentarse has now transformed into different forms, but likely because of the context, again, you can understand that different type of sentence structure even if you couldn't produce it. Even in a virtual context, like when you are listening to someone tell a story, let's say, and they say, okay, luego Pablo se acerca a una mesa y se sienta. Maybe you're not familiar with everything going on in that sentence, but you're like, you never heard of acerca, but you hear cerca, and you know that means near or close. Or you're like, okay, Pablo, close, like near a table, y se sienta. Okay, that kind of sounds like sentar, so he sits down. So your brain kind of automatically picks up on Pablo goes up to a table and sits down, right? You couldn't have put that sentence together, perhaps. Maybe you didn't know where the se would go and all these things, but you can understand it when you hear it, okay? Sentence structure is more easily understood than it is produced. This is normal and it's natural. We also want to understand the difference between passive memory and active memory. So the words that are in your passive memory are those that you have heard before and somehow you have put meaning to them. Maybe because they're cognate, maybe because of context, maybe because someone literally just told you what it meant in the moment, maybe because you went and looked it up, right? Somehow you know this word, you're familiar with it, you know what it means when you hear it, but it is not so ingrained yet that you remember it when you need to use it. That means that this word is in your passive memory, but is not yet in your active memory. And active memory is what we need to be able to produce the language. Finally, when you're speaking, it is something that is very spontaneous and you're going to make mistakes. It's just normal. You're going to make mistakes. And for some, the fear of making mistakes inhibits their ability to actually be able to speak confidently. Did you know that you can speak confidently and relatively fluently even with mistakes? But it's hard to do if you are having a lot of fear. So fear is another reason why you can understand more than you can speak. Now, if any of these situations describes you, this is excellent news. It is nothing to feel bad about. If you can understand a lot of Spanish, this means that you have been exposing yourself to a lot of Spanish. You have been listening, you have been reading, you have been not just listening and reading randomly, you have been using comprehensible input. Because if you continuously only listen to Spanish that is way above your level, your progress is going to be very slow. But if you're listening to things that you can understand but not perfectly, it's like what you know plus one, then that's when the learning happens. That's when you start to deduce meanings in all the ways that we've discussed from the context, or maybe you look up a few words, or your speaking partner tells you what it means, just whatever it is. You have started to pick up a lot of vocabulary from your listening, and you have put meaning to those words. These are excellent things that you have been able to accomplish so far. Having lots of exposure to comprehensible input is the foundation for being able to produce the language. If you have heard something that you need to say, you've heard it said properly several times, it's going to be easier to adopt that into your own speech. That doesn't mean that it's always automatic. No, it does not mean that, but it's going to be easier than if you had never heard it at all. Obviously. Another reason this is so good is that when you do go to speak, even if you're struggling through it, you have a fighting chance of understanding the response back. You won't always understand, that's okay. Obviously, your understanding is going to be affected by the speed of the speaker, how much they use connected speech, how much they articulate their particular accent, depending on what you're most accustomed to. However, having a fighting chance of understanding the response back, even if you are struggling with your speaking, is going to make the conversation a lot more comfortable. Even if you have to ask that person to repeat, what's the point of asking them to repeat if you really don't know any words? You don't have any vocabulary in your head. Why should they repeat it? You're not going to understand it anyway. But maybe you do have those words. Maybe it's just that they went a little too fast. Maybe it's that they can say it a different way. Sometimes people are good at that, even if they're not teachers. Some people are really bad at that. They don't know how to say it except for the one way that they said it. But some people really will say it in a different way, and now you get it, okay? And that's because you do have all of this vocabulary in your head, which is a fantastic thing. You have to start here to be a good speaker. One of the members of my Spanish program for upper beginners and intermediates, Camino Spanish Story Club, Colleen, is a really good example of that. She says, I really did not know how to approach learning Spanish on my own. This course has helped me to boost my confidence. Today was the first time that I have had a Spanish long conversation with someone I did not know well. We talked about 30 minutes. We understood each other well. I know I did not speak perfect Spanish, but this was a win for me. Thanks, Erica and Misael, for your hard work in making this program a more efficient way to improve my Spanish. I really appreciate it. That's incredible. To have a 30-minute conversation with someone that you don't even know well means that you have accumulated a lot of vocabulary. Your listening comprehension is quite advanced. Notice that she said that she knows she made mistakes when speaking, but if that conversation was able to continue, she was making herself understood. So now that you know that it's an excellent thing that you can understand more Spanish than what you can speak, here are some tips to get your speaking to the level that you ultimately want it to be at, right? Because obviously we want to improve our speaking as well. First, continue with your excellent routine of comprehensible input, listening and reading that can never stop. Next, do something that I like to call prepare, practice, present. Focus on the Spanish that you need. Think of a conversation that you would like to have and actually do some preparation with the particular vocabulary that you're going to need, putting the sentences together in the way that you're going to need them. You may need someone to help you with this initially, it depends on your level, or you may be able to do the best you can yourself and then have someone kind of help you correct it. And ultimately, you want to develop the ability to self-correct, and that comes from, guess what? A lot of comprehensible input. Notice how what you're saying is different from how you're repeatedly hearing it said, and make those corrections yourself. This is what I had to do a lot because I didn't have a lot of people to correct me. I never had formal Spanish lessons. I got really used to self-correcting, like, oh my goodness, that is not what I've been saying. They've been understanding me, and that's why no one was even correcting me. But as I continue to listen, I'm like, yeah, I've been saying that wrong. So if you can get into that habit of noticing, that is going to go so far in helping you ultimately become the independent language learner that you need to be to really master the language. Once you have some things prepared that you would like to speak about, practice. Now, remember, you need to practice in a way that puts these words, these sentences into your active memory, not just your passive memory. So there are several ways to do that. Some people like to use flashcards. Caution, if you do that, please create your own. Buying a pack of flashcards or downloading a random pack of flashcards typically is not the most efficient way to learn new vocabulary. One, because it's not necessarily what you are trying to say, and two, flashcards tend to come in just like a one word at a time. Here we have a word, here we have the translation of that one word. That is going to be a really slow process. Your brain needs context in order to hold on to the vocabulary. Context for vocabulary is like the anchor for a ship, okay? It prevents it from just floating away. So you have got to have something to anchor that word to. It needs to be in a sentence. Even if that's not the only sentence in which you're ever going to say that word, this is a foundation for you to remember that word in the first place. So make your own flashcards, but use complete sentences on them. Did you know that you can do that? If you make your own, you can do that. Make complete sentences or phrases. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a complete sentence, but just a phrase so that that word sitting there, whether it's in the middle, the beginning, or the end of the phrase, has something to hang on to. Your brain's going to hang on to it a lot more. Now, making your flashcards yourself doesn't mean that you have to randomly come up with the translations yourself, because often this is going to come from a context, like what you're hearing, or maybe something that your course taught you, or something that came up in a conversation that you had. Just steal that phrase that you heard someone say or read. Just steal the whole thing. It's okay. And write that on your flashcard, and then in Spanish, and then put on the other side what the English equivalent is. You yourself are definitely going to be able to more easily determine what the English translation would be than doing it the other way around. So steal the Spanish from someone. You don't have to just come up with it yourself. Steal the Spanish from your book, from your course, from your speaking partner, from wherever you're going to steal it from, and then put the English translation on the back. Put the meaning, okay? You're not going to translate it word for word. Sometimes you can. Sometimes the languages really will translate word for word, but we all know that that is not always the case. You want to have the meaning, the Spanish meaning here and the English meaning here. When you go to practice, you're going to go from English to Spanish, okay? You're going to look at English. I'm assuming English is your native language. If it's not, then certainly put it in your native language, right? Or whatever language that you're learning Spanish from, all right? I'm just going to continue calling it English for the purpose of simplicity of this video. So you're going to look at the English side, and then you yourself need to come up with the Spanish version. You need to recall how to express that thought, not translate word for word, but how to express that thought in Spanish. And then you're going to check yourself and do that as many times as you need to. A lot of people do this opposite, and they say, I am so good with my vocabulary because I just quickly run through my flashcards. I'm looking at the Spanish. I immediately know what it says in English. How come I can't speak it when it's time? It's because you're doing it backwards. If you're looking at the Spanish and recalling what that means in English, all you're doing is working on your listening comprehension, your reading comprehension. And if you're watching this video, then probably your listening comprehension is more advanced than your speaking. Translation is not a bad thing as long as you are focused on transmitting the same meaning, not just going word for word. These flashcards can be physical, like index cards that you write, or they can be digital flashcards. You can use a system like Anki or Anki. I think I will never know how to properly pronounce that. And create your cards there. Quizlet. Okay, there are tons of them. All right, it all works. Everything works. Or if you don't like flashcards, or if that's just too cumbersome for you, do what I actually prefer to do myself. I prefer to just write. I like to just write things. So just write that sentence in English, write it in Spanish. Make sure there's a way for you to not be seen both at the same time when you don't want to, when you actually do want to test yourself. It's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be using a spaced repetition system that is built into some digital flashcard systems. That's great if you love that and you want to use it, but you don't have to, okay? I never did that to learn Spanish. I did not know what a spaced repetition system was, never used that. It's okay. Just to do whatever you need to do. Write it down with pen and paper, write it down on a Google Doc. Just get it in a way that you can test your recall, okay? You're gonna put those phrases from your passive memory into your active memory, and they're going to be more readily available to you when it's time to use them in a conversation. If fear is holding you back, if that is why you are not really practicing your speaking, there are so many ways to speak without people. I just told you one. I just told you about this translation or flashcard method. There are many others. I have a whole video dedicated to that, which you can check out right here. And even when you are practicing with someone, did you know that it could also be someone who's learning the language right along with you? It could even be someone who doesn't speak the language at all. Sometimes it just takes a face to talk to and to practice with. Sometimes it's a matter of just practicing what you already know, but you need to get it out. You need to make the mistakes. You need to notice, I'm really needing this word. I don't know it. Let me jot that down real quick. Add that phrase or that sentence that I needed into my flashcard system or into my notes so that I can go back later. Sometimes it's only when you're in the activity of speaking that you realize what you're missing. You realize that vocabulary that you're missing, that grammar that you're missing. You can make a note of that, and then that just gets recycled back into your system. It is a beautiful thing, but you have to practice. And it does not always need to be with a language expert. It doesn't always need to be with your coach, your teacher, your tutor, even a native speaking partner. Sometimes it can just be a friendly face, and that's all you need to get your tongue rolling and get in a lot of that practice that you need. It's pretty quick for a language expert to come in and give you those corrections that you need, but it takes longer to actually practice and work out those kinks in your actual brain. And to do that, your speaking partner doesn't need to know a whole lot. It's okay. To review, because I think this has been a pretty long video, but I hope you've gotten extreme value from it. You understand more than you can speak because of cognates, because of all those similar words between English and Spanish, because of context, be that a real context or a virtual context when you're listening or reading. Also, sentence structure, aka grammar, is more easily understood than it is produced. Words go into your passive memory before they make it to your active memory, and sometimes fear is inhibiting you from speaking to your full potential. But if you can indeed understand more than what you can speak, this is a great thing because it proves that you've been spending a sufficient amount of time with input. Don't ever stop with comprehensible input, that is. And also because you have a fighting chance of understanding the responses back when you're in a conversation, even if you're struggling a bit with your speaking. But to improve your speaking, because I know that you want to do that, you can continue with your excellent comprehensible input routine. You can prepare, practice, and present what you want to say. When you do that presentation, which all that means is a conversation usually, or it can be even a monologue type of presentation, you want to make a note of those moments when wanted to say this, didn't have the words, didn't have the grammar, or I got through it, but really I was substituting with all of these words that I didn't really want. I would like to say it like this next time. Jot that down. No time? Maybe you can record some of your speaking sessions in order to review them afterwards. Make those notes, recycle those into your study system. Your speaking is going to improve like never before. Now, if you're at that level, if you're at that, kind of pushing that intermediate level and you're like, oh, that sounds great, but also sounds a bit overwhelming, I'd like some help with that. How do I even know if my input is sufficiently related to the output that I need to produce, that vocabulary and grammar that I need in order to transform the input into output, or my input's just really boring. There are things that I can understand, but I'm not enjoying it anymore. Or where do I find these people to practice with? All these questions, okay, that you probably have. Go check out my workshop made just for you. It's a workshop made for that intermediate level, ericaraylanguage.com/intermediate workshop, where you're going to learn how to improve your Spanish grammar and make vocabulary stick by reversing the traditional learning process, how to start to clean up your mistakes without becoming overwhelmed or discouraged, because that's the last thing that we want. A surprisingly simple strategy to turn your Spanish input into output, putting what you're learning to use with zero fear and zero stress, and also how exactly to use stories to create an irresistible Spanish learning routine, which you actually look forward to doing every single day. Again, you can check that out at the link below or by going to ericaraylanguage.com/intermediate workshop. It's completely free. I hope that was helpful, guys. You can check out this video next, and don't forget to go out and share a part of your personal story with someone in your new language today. I'll see you next time. Hasta la próxima.